NATO leaders signed on to a new spending target this week, promising to spend 5% of GDP on defense by 2035. This will lead to a major ramp up for the militaries of NATO members. So what does it mean for Canada? Well, Canada has failed to spend the 2% target on defense for years, but Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised to get there by next March. But now the bar is being raised.
5% of our GDP would be about $150 billion.
I mean, that's a lot.
It's a lot of numbers.
Per year?
Per year.
That's a lot.
Of course, it
so
is
it
a
means
lot.
that
Well, Christian Amanpour is right. $150 billion is a lot of money to spend every year on the military. But the new rules from NATO split that 5% target into two different spending buckets. 3.5%, or about $107 billion for Canada in today's numbers, will go directly towards military things like jets, submarines, weapons, salaries, and training. But the other 1.5%, or about $43 billion, can be invested in defense-related infrastructure, things such as ports, airfields, or roads in the Arctic, or roads to critical mineral projects, for example. Well, to talk about all of this, we've got Wendy Gilmour. She's a former Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO, so you know all about this stuff. So Wendy Gilmour, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.
I mean, let's start with the breakdown of the spending commitments and just this 5% and how it splits down. I mean, what is your take on this new goal and the new structure of it?
Well, I think it first and foremost recognizes that we are in a period right now of instability that we have not been at for some time. There is a conventional war in Europe. Our European allies, particularly those on the eastern flank, are terrified. There is instability, I think an understatement, in the Middle East right now. Canada's facing threats that we haven't faced before, including to our cyber security and other elements. So it's about time we stepped up and spent more money.
So just talk about the way it breaks down, right? Because you mentioned cyber and these other things. There is going to be a level of national security resilience that will count towards defense spending now in a way that it probably hasn't done in the past. And also even economic security kind of fits into that. How do you see it working?
So the way that NATO has come out with the new defense investment pledge is 3.5% on direct military expenditures, of which, frankly, our cyber resilience could fit in that. The communication security establishment is part of the defense portfolio. 1.5%, as you said, in infrastructure, which can be everything from the logistics hubs in the Arctic to, frankly, a more robust telecommunication system across Canada, national projects. It isn't going to be easy. Our European partners are as nervous as we are, certainly those countries that have been around where Canada is. I remember just seeing recently the Netherlands has said that, that this is going to be a real challenge, but they also recognize that very few of their bridges would withstand mobility, a tank crossing over them. So this is an opportunity for them to invest in the infrastructure that they need to ensure their own security as well as that of collectively of NATO.
Yeah, you've got countries like Germany that are coming from a very low base, obviously, but you talk to diplomats in the Baltics, Poland, and they're like looking at Western Europe and Canada saying, you guys need to wake up a little bit, right? And like they see this as absolutely necessary and mandatory, and they're close to it in a lot of cases. How realistic is it for Canada and the rest of NATO, though?
I think the fact that we are moving to 2% in year has meant that Prime Minister Carney was able to go to the NATO summit and stand up proudly and say that Canada is investing for our own reasons, not simply because NATO has told us to. To move to the 100 billion plus number is going to be really challenging. NATO has set a 10-year time horizon to do that. Apparently everything will be revisited in 2029, which also gives us a chance to revisit it in light of what will then be global circumstances. One would hope that the conflict in Ukraine would be settled. I have my doubts. I don't think that Russia is going away anytime soon. So I think if I were to tell Canadians, the most important thing is we're doing this for our own reasons, not just to look good in the eyes of our allies.
Well, 2029, it depends on the threat situation. It depends on the president, who it is at that point in time, and how they feel about all of this, because a lot of this is being pushed by the United States, right? And sort of their threats to move away from NATO.
I mean, the one thing that was really positive that came out of the NATO summit is that while the declaration was quite short, it was clear that Article 5 remains first, front of mind, not only for the rest of NATO, but also for the United States. The Americans have, for a long time, reality, not just what they believe, have invested more in defense than the rest, proportionally, than the rest of NATO. It is time for the rest of NATO, Canada included, to take control over our own defense needs and not simply rely on a big brother. That being said, it's also important that the U.S. stays in the mix, because the U.S. can
Right.
bring capabilities that none of the rest of us have. But we need to be a credible partner so that we can negotiate, frankly, with the U.S. on our own terms.
Well, I mean, this is a key thing. I think Mark Carney realized you have to pay the 2% cover charge to get a seat at the table and be taken seriously in these things.
As opposed to being on the menu.
Yes, exactly, to use his language there. But, because Canada kind of overdrew on the peace dividend, in the eyes of a lot of our allies. But this is going to make defense potentially the single biggest line item in the federal budget, right? Like moving past transfers to seniors at 150, in current dollars, it's about a third of all spending if it goes up to this amount at 5% of GDP. You got to bring the country with you, because even the Prime Minister talked about that it may lead to a conversation about things the federal government can no longer do if this is the path we have to stay on at these levels. This is where the tying it to industrial policy and doing it for our own good seems to be the start of that conversation.
The Prime Minister has promised, he did so in the throne speech that the King delivered, that we would have a defence industrial strategy. We haven't had one for, frankly, a very long time. It's about time that we tie, a little bit as you said, we tie defence spending into broader economic objectives, not the least of which is addressing Canadian productivity. Canadian companies have one of the lowest percentage of reinvestment in R&D in the OECD and amongst Western nations. If the government is able to bring incentives to the table to get Canadian companies to invest, to step up to the plate and work collectively in delivering this amount, it's possible. But you're right, it's a huge objective.
Yeah, it just seems, an enormously challenging thing to do, because I think getting to 2%, like going back to the last election and the throne speech, that was all on the table. 5% was not. Like, it was out there as a conversation, but not as an ironclad commitment. And here we are, less than 2 months after an election, committing to this. It is going to be a big shift in how the federal government functions if we deliver on this.
I think one of the things that I'm encouraged by is that Canada is there. We've made the commitment. It's 1.5% in infrastructure investments. These are national projects. We already know that the government is signed up to national projects. I'm really encouraged that the necessary legislation has gone through the House. It's now in the Senate that will hopefully deliver these national projects more quickly. That, I think, is all part of the plan.
Yeah.
It needs all-party consensus to make this happen. It needs the government to be able to put in place sustained commitments that are not going to sort of ebb and flow with the whims of the political process. And I'd like to think that the Canadian public is getting there, that they understand that this is a need.
Yeah, well, they're going to have to get there, have to have the conversation at least, because it seems like a path that we're going to be on, and it is going to be a significant amount of public resources going there. Wendy Gilmour, I appreciate you having the conversation with us. It's going to be something we're going to talk about over the next decade. That's Wendy Gilmour, former Assistant Secretary General for Defense Investment at NATO. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much.